This is Marky Billson, Tri-City Sports Now on 1420 WEMB Sports Radio, as well as JetBroadcasting.live. Joining me on the line is columnist from the Hartford Courant, Dominic Amore. He has recently written a book called A Franchise on the Rise, the First 20 Years of the New York Yankees. I, of course, love baseball history. And frankly, I think a lot of Yankees fans, although, yes, they do have the 10-game lead in first place in their division, so it's hardly the end of the world, but they may want to think about their history after the 19-3 loss that the Yanks suffered to the Red Sox yesterday. And so, Dominic Amore, I wanted to ask you, this is dealing with the New York Highlanders, baseball 100 years ago, more than 100 years ago. I'm sometimes told by sports talk radio consultants, because I love to make historical references. I'm fascinated by old-time baseball, dead ball baseball, that sort of thing. Oh, nobody else is, Marky, and all that. So why write a book about the New York Yankees when they weren't even called the Yankees and they were losers? What is the impetus for that? What's the audience for that?
Well, I think there are a lot of people like you who are interested in baseball history and baseball of that period. We don't have a lot of film or a lot of visual evidence of what the game was like at that time. We don't have a lot of we tend to look at the statistics. When you look at the game last night that you referenced,
mm-hmm.
You saw a lot of references to things that haven't happened since 1912. And yet the game was so completely different in 1912 that I thought there was. I've always been fascinated with this idea with baseball from this period. It's kind of how I started to rekindle or kindle my love for sports writing. And
yeah.
I'm a sports writer. When I was a kid, I used to go to the New Haven Library and dig out 100-year-old magazines and read about baseball at that time. So it's an interest for me, and I do think there are a lot of people interested in baseball at this time. So when the idea was actually put to me, it was kind of right in my wheelhouse.
And I agree with you there. Yes, I think that if you're a baseball fan, I perish the thought that somebody hasn't given you a book about Babe Ruth or Lou Gehrig or Ty Cobb for that matter. And going into the old records and the old newspapers to read. Sure, I've done that myself. It's even things where you feel like an expert. You saw maybe where Steve Wilkerson got a pitching save for the Baltimore Orioles in their victory late night in the 16th inning against the Angels yesterday, or I guess the game finished up today, but they say it's the first time a position player ever got a save. Well, actually, I know Ty Cobb got one. It's just the first time since the save became an official statistic that a position player got one. And so those are sort of things that, you dazzle your friends with and all this. I think one of the interesting facts about the New York Yankees was that they were not always the New York Yankees. They were originally the Baltimore Orioles. Now, I know that the Orioles, and a lot of people think, really? Baltimore Orioles, St. Louis Browns, how did that work out? Well, in the 1890s with John McGraw and Huey E.I. Jennings and, great players whose names still mean something today, the Orioles were a dominant franchise in the National League. And then for a couple of years, there was a Baltimore Orioles in the American League. How did that Baltimore Orioles team become, how did they move to New York?
Yeah, interestingly, too, if you remember, you referenced Frank Messer and some of those old Yankee telecasts back in the 60s when that theme song was written. Fans don't frequently refer to scrappy players as an old Oriole. And he wasn't talking about the Baltimore Orioles that we know. He was talking about the 1890s version in the National League, because that team obviously was known for fighting, scrapping, and brawling, and that style of play. John McGraw was a player on that team. And for many, many years later, around baseball clubhouses, an old Oriole was what they would call a gamer.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of the tradition of that name and that franchise. That franchise basically broke up. Most of the players moved to New York, to Brooklyn, or the Giants. We really feel our, for instance, moved to Brooklyn, and the manager Ned Hanlon went to Brooklyn. So that National League team, as successful as it was in the 1890s, folded up by the end of the decade. And the new American League did not have a team in New York. They had a team in Baltimore. They adopted the name. They got to pay a rights fee in those days. And they were generally known as the Baltimore Orioles, 1901, 1902. But what happened was that franchise essentially folded up. A number of, John McGraw and a number of players in the National League wanted to sabotage the new American League by attacking one of their franchises, stealing as many of their players as they could, which they did, and force it to fold in the middle of the season, which would render the schedule and everything else, into chaos. But Van Johnson, the president of the American League, kept that Baltimore franchise afloat best he could to finish the season and finish a legitimate schedule in 1902. But then the franchise went away, it disappeared. And so they didn't actually move to New York. They essentially folded, and a new franchise, expansion franchise, was established in New York, to take their place. And that's essentially what the New York franchise was really put together from scratch and very quickly in the winter of 02-03 and ready to play by 1903.
But you speak of the rating of players, and I mean, think of it kind of like, more modern day, let's say, the USFL signing NFL players, that sort of thing. Right. Well, this was going on at the turn of the 20th century with the American and National Leagues. I mean, these were rival leagues, and the first star, I think, of the Highlanders, I might say, was a guy named Jack Chesbro, who was one of the top pitchers of the era. He's the last guy to win 40 games in a season. You don't even start 40 games these days. How did the Highlanders acquire him from the powerful Pittsburgh Pirates?
Right, the Pirates were a great team in 1901, 1902, and that was the place to go if you wanted to raid players to start a new American League franchise. And the New York franchise, and I'm calling it that because the Highlanders wasn't really an official name. Mm-hmm. It was one of several names that were kind of used popularly for the franchise. But the American League, Dan Johnson and Clark Griffith, who was installed as the manager and essentially GM of the new franchise, they got a total of 7 players from Pittsburgh, including Jack Chesbro. He was the best one. Now, obviously, if you were going to raid that Pittsburgh team in 1902, who's the player you would want? Honus Wagner.
Yeah.
And there was a wintry night in Carnegie, Pennsylvania, when Wagner went on a sleigh ride in the snow, which is I guess what you did in those days. And when he returned to home, he found Clark Griffith on his front porch. He invited him in, and Griffith threw 20 $1,000 bills on his kitchen table and asked Honus Wagner to come and play for the New York franchise. And but Wagner was the one guy who was very loyal to not only Pittsburgh but the owner, Barney Dreyfuss, and he stayed. But you think about how much different the early history of the Yankees and the American League would have been if Honus Wagner came to play for them. They would have been on the map immediately. They probably would have won championships immediately, and there wouldn't have been that need to put them on the map 20 years later.
Yeah, Honus Wagner was from Carnegie, PA, which is about 5 miles south of Pittsburgh. So, there's the hometown star and all that. The high school in Carnegie, PA, Carleton High, today, their football team plays at Honus Wagner Field, and there are many other, establishments, a mural, the Honus Wagner Apartments, et cetera, in Carnegie, Pennsylvania, and such. We're talking to Dominic Amore. He is the author of A Franchise on the Rise, the First 20 Years of the New York Yankees. Look, I know that nicknames back in the early days of baseball, maybe they weren't official and such, and you mentioned that with the Highlanders, who I assume got their name by playing at Hilltop Park in Manhattan. I want to ask you, though, how did the name New York Yankees come about?
Well, like a lot of nicknames, particularly that period, it kind of was a grassroots thing. They did play on one of the highest points in Manhattan on 168th and Broadway. It was known for its great views of the Hudson. And so the Highlanders, also the president of the team, the top executive was named Gordon, and the name Highlanders came from the British regiment Gordon's Highlanders. So there were some newspapers that threw the name Highlanders out there. There were some that called them the Americans because they were the American League entry in New York. There were some that called them after the Griff men, after Griff. Some would call them the Deveryites after Bill Devery. They had a bunch of different nicknames. The Americans seem to be the most common. The most American League franchises in two-team cities were known as the Americans, the other the Nationals. But in their first opening day, they really had a lavish patriotic display. They had American flags all over the field. They had also flags of other nationalities because New York was such a multinational place. And so some newspapers began as early as 1904 calling them the Yankees because obviously Yankees was the nickname for Americans overseas. So they started to be called the Yankees and the Yanks informally as early as 1904. And that started to spread. And when they finally left Hilltop Park 10 years later to go into the Polo Grounds, and by this time, official nicknames were starting to become the thing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Highlanders was never really, they didn't have Highlanders on their uniforms. They never had an H or any kind of logo associated with the Highlanders. But when they went into when they went to the Polo Grounds in 1913, they hired Frank Chance away from the National League Cubs. And Chance wrote a piece in Baseball Magazine suggesting that the team shouldn't even have a nickname because they had never won anything to earn a nickname. And the Giants had earned their nickname by winning in the 1880s.
Sure.
And that they should just be called New York. They should just have New York on their uniform, and they should just be simply called New York. And the owner, Frank Farrell, did not like that idea. And ultimately, they decided to take the Yankee nickname that had become more and more popularly used, make it official, and they officially became the Yankees in 1913.
Now, you mentioned moving from Hilltop Park to the Polo Grounds and such. What was that like? Because as you mentioned, I mean, John McGraw, he hated the American League. There was a real rivalry between the American and the National League in those days. I mean, who won the World Series was everybody. It's like, if I can explain this to you, Dominic Amore, when the SEC plays for a national championship in football, it doesn't matter really who it is. I mean, SEC fans root for that team. That's when it's actually okay for an Auburn fan to root for Alabama or vice versa. And that's the way it was back in those days. So how did you even get tenancy at the Polo Grounds with this strong rivalry?
Yeah. You know, it kind of, the American and National League owners came to an agreement just before the New York team came into existence, where they would stop bidding against each other for each other's players. But the rivalry between the American National, as far as McGraw was concerned, really continued to be hot because the Yankees had acquired a number of players, such as Kid Elberfeld, who McGraw had his eye on from other teams. So McGraw continued to dislike the Yankees, and in 1904, when the Yankees and Red Sox were in a really close pennant race, remember, it was the Giants who said, we're not going to play the American League champion in a World Series, which almost ended the World Series in its second year. There was no World Series in 1904. And it would have been interesting if the Yankees had won that championship in 2004, if the Giants would have been able to resist the tremendous pressure in New York to play them in a World Series. But in any event, the rivalry between the Giants and the Yankees started to soften in 1911 when the Polo Grounds caught fire and half of it burned down, and the Giants had no place to play for a number of months of the following season. Now, what had happened, interestingly, when Van Johnson was trying to establish the Yankee franchise, the Giants blocked everything that they tried to do to get a place to play. It was very difficult for them to do it. But now that the shoe was on the other foot, the Giants needed a place to play, and the Yankees offered up Hilltop Park, allowed them to play their home games there for 3 to 4 months or as long as they needed. So the relationship between the franchises became in 1913 when the lease with the people who owned the property at Hilltop Park was up, and they wanted to demolish it. It's Columbia Presbyterian Hospital today. When the Yankees needed a place to play, the Giants offered up the Polo Grounds as a temporary rental, and they didn't expect the Yankees to stay 10 years. They kind of became the in-law that wouldn't leave. But that's essentially the relationship softened. Giants owed the Yankees a favor, and they allowed them to rent the Polo Grounds for their home games from 1913 through 1922.
We think about big market teams and the New York Yankees. I mean, that they're the definition of the big market team. So why did it take until 1921 and acquiring Babe Ruth from the Red Sox? Why did it take a generation for the Yankees to win a pennant in such a big market like New York? It didn't take the Giants and the Dodgers that long.
No, it didn't take those teams as long. One reason was, which is always the reason teams lose, and that's incompetence at the top, incompetent management. When you think of the Yankees during their first decade that Farrell and Devery owned the team, they were much like the Yankees of the 1980s when Steinbrenner was kind of at his worst. They were always buying players overpriced who were past their prime. Willie Keeler was past his prime when the Yankees got him. They picked up home run Baker a little bit later on. He was past his prime when the Yankees got him. The Yankees had gotten a collection of players who were just past their prime, and so they spent a lot of money without a lot of return. And what ultimately happened, and they also changed managers frequently, not always wisely. And so ultimately, it changed when Jacob Rupert bought the team, a long, complicated process in and of itself. But he started to put the building blocks in place for the Yankees to capitalize on their location and build the kind of franchise that we knew them to be later on.
Now, when did Rupert own the franchise? When did he buy it? And, I mean, there's a Rupert Place where Yankee Stadium used to stand, much like at the University of Tennessee. There are a lot of streets named after Johnny Majors or Pat Summitt or whoever. But let me ask you, who was it that, when did Rupert buy the team?
Yeah, it was after the 1914 season. Things had really bottomed out under Farrell and Devery. They were kind of corrupt New York Tammany Hall figures. They began fighting with each other. They bought a big piece of land near what is now the Henry Hudson Bridge in far northern tip of Manhattan, and they tried to build a stadium there, but they couldn't stanch the river, and they ended up losing their shirt on it, and they still had no place to play. So here they were, and they had kind of falling out with Frank Chance that was very public. He left. After only 2 years, he was going to be the savior of the franchise. And their manager, at the end of the 1914 season, was Roger Peckinpah, 23 years old.
Yes, we talked about that before privately.
It'll never be broken now.
Yeah.
So the franchise was really in disarray, and the American League wanted Farrell and Beverly out. They wanted a little more stability, a little deeper pockets in that franchise. Now, Rupert, meanwhile, was a pretty interesting guy. He'd been a congressman from Manhattan in the 1890s, but only a couple of terms. He didn't like politics, and he got out. He was very cosmopolitan. He was kind of a sportsman in the way that term was used in those days, kind of a bon vivant. And he got interested in baseball with a friend of his, Colonel Till Houston, and they started to go to Giants games all the time. And they became friends with John McGraw because they were influential high rollers in the city. And they wanted to buy the Giants. And McGraw told them that, well, the Giants are not going to be for sale. But why don't you buy the American League team? I think you could do something with them, kind of take ownership of it. It'd be a challenge, but I think you could probably have some fun, maybe doing something with, putting that franchise right and putting it on the map. So the ball started to roll. And it was a long, complicated process, a lot of haggling. Rupert would spend his entire off-season in Frenchburg, Indiana, in the mineral springs there, wrapping towels and doing business on his phone from there. And he ultimately pulled the deal off, bought the team for $480,000, which was a nice return return for Farrell and Devery on their $20,000 original investment only 10 years earlier. But he bought the team after the 1914 season, and part of the haggling, Marky, to buy the team, Rupert wanted a big-name manager. He basically told the American-made people, Ben Johnson and Charles Comiskey, you go convince John McGraw to manage, and I'll buy the team. McGraw wanted no part of that, so that wasn't going to happen. So they said, how about Connie Mack? And they went to Philadelphia and tried to convince Connie Mack to sell his piece of the A's, buy a piece of the Yankees, and become their manager. And it got as close as Mack going to French Lick, Indiana to chat with Rupert about it, but he decided he wanted to stay in Philadelphia, and he did. And they ended up hiring Wild Bill Donovan, who was a promising young manager. He'd been managing Providence in the International League, and he was kind of star-crossed in his. But he was their first manager. And basically, Rupert took over the team after the 1914 season, and immediately the team had a new air of stability and respectability.
Well, you've just blown my mind with that French Lick, Indiana reference, because everybody knows that's where Larry Bird's from. So why would they meet in French Lick? Why there, of all places?
Well, French, long before Larry Bird, of course, French Lick was known for its mineral springs.
Okay.
And it was a resort. There was a resort there by the springs that all of the rich and famous of the era would go and spend and for relaxation and rest and rehab. They would all go there, and it was the Astors and the Carnegies and the Rockefellers. They would all go to French Lick, Indiana, for periods of time. And the mineral springs there produced a product called Pluto water, which was very, very popular in the early part of the 20th century. Louis Armstrong, for instance, endorsed it and swore by it. It was basically a laxative, but it was produced in French Lick, Indiana, and it brought a tremendous amount of money and fame to the resort and the mineral springs in the community. Ultimately, it was found that Pluto water contained very, very high dosage of lithium, and when lithium became a controlled substance in 1971, Pluto water, the factory had to shut down, and the resort shut down basically, and the city became, much more kind of a Rust Belt city. But yeah, that was French Lick, Indiana was a big deal for the rich and famous, a big escape, and that's where Rupert spent that winter, several months, again bathing in the springs and drinking the lithium-laced water and making his deals with Ben Johnson and Farrell and Devery and the whole crew that owned the Yankees.
Well, I've got to take a break here. Otherwise, I literally could talk to you, Dominic Amore, all day. And, I mean, see how fascinating? We haven't even gotten out Rupert buys the Yankees. Well, we got to Rupert buys the Yankees, but Rupert buys Babe Ruth. But everybody knows that. No, all the, and Ruth had just set the home run record with the Red Sox, and then he just smashes it with the Yankees the next year, and the rest is history as the Yankees go on to become, in most people's mind, I would say, the preeminent American sports franchise. His name is Dominic Amore. Read about a franchise on the rise, the first 20 years of the New York Yankees. I'm fascinated by this stuff. I think that you have been too. Thanks for joining us here today on Tri-City Sports Now.
With All-American